I've served many grades throughout my career, and a little bit about myself is I'm originally from Trenton. It's about a half hour south of Detroit. If anybody's a downriver person, knows that area at all. And family of educators. I have my husband is actually a third grade teacher in Kalamazoo Public, has been in a classroom for 30 years. He just told me on the phone, I was laughing with Michelle because they are calling him 25 because number 25 on the seniority list there out of probably 650 some teachers. So proud of him and the Connections education. I have two semi-adult children, I guess. And I'm excited to have everyone here today. And I've never presented with Michelle before, so we are really excited to have this opportunity. We'll be probably kind of relaxed in this small group and give lots of opportunities for people to talk. And here you go, Michelle.
Hello, I'm Michelle Wagner. I'm from Wayne County, which is the biggest county in Michigan, so very diverse and excited to be here. I see colleagues in the room, so it's nice to see all of you. I am a manager of educational services there and a former literacy consultant, but I feel like at my heart, I'm still a teacher. So I hope that, and I know Janice feels the same way as we're sharing today, I hope that comes across in all that we say, that we're teachers and we're coaches and we're in here to do the work that needs to be done so that every child really gets what they need.
All right, so purpose, high quality literacy instruction must reflect current research in order to meet the needs of the whole child. So we will definitely be emphasizing the importance of research and instruction. And our outcomes, the literacy essentials are built upon the science of reading, which is current research, and responsive literacy instruction allows teachers to provide differentiated instruction in order to meet the needs of the whole child. And we've been talking a lot about the whole child the last couple of days as well, so we're going to try to help connect the dots. So documents you might want to reference or have handy would be your practices for the organizational practices that we had out earlier, as well as if you are pre-K, K3, 4, 5, maybe choose which is most relevant to you. So those that essential practice document out as well. So we're going to give, again, lots of time to reflect, chat, make some connections today. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Also, I'm going to leave it at that for now. Okay. And things in the middle, we will get to that a little bit later. Also, we wanted to make sure that we are showing a connection to Michigan's top 10 and 10, which funny enough actually is 8 now, but they're still calling it the top 10 and 10. So good thing this is not the math breakout. So goal 2 is tied to this as well today, which is to improve early literacy achievement. So just wanted to make that connection as well.
So as we share today, we just want to make sure that well, of course it's obvious. We're not going to get through everything in 90 minutes that there could be talked about when we talk about literacy instruction. So our goal today is just to kind of touch that tip of the iceberg and to take it in whatever direction you might see it being best use of your time. So if you have ideas, please feel free to share those. So let's start with a quick inclusion activity. So we call this one In My Day. So in my day, when I started teaching, this is very similar to what you would have seen on my desk. If you're someone who started teaching maybe in the early 2000s, you might remember this. Those circles meant that it hadn't been turned in yet and I needed to follow up with them. So this kind of represents what it was like in my day. Around the room, we have some posters with a this or a that. So if you can think back to that first year that you started teaching, and if you could find 4 posters where you're going to use the little stickies that are in front of you and just indicate when you started teaching, was it more this image or that image? So you can pick any of them in the room, but at least 4. If you could put your sticky on at least 4 of them. All right, as we find our way back to our seats, take a look at these posters. What do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Anybody have a comment that they notice? Yes, she said we've all been around a long time. But I do see some stickies on things that are a little more modern, which means that we have a nice variety in this room too. The one thing I want to lift from this activity is this is proof to us that the experts are in the room. They're not up here only or anywhere. We are all in this together. And so please, if you have ideas as we go throughout the session that you want to lift up, or if you, goodness, and if we say something wrong, somebody please say, hey, did you mean? Because we're recording, right? But seriously, we're all experts in this space. We're all sharing and learning and growing together. And so we want to invite you to share at any point. We can walk the microphone over. Okay. And the next thing we want to talk about, this is called the ladder of inference. And as we talk about literacy, I feel like sometimes right now there's a tension, and I guess it's not even sometimes, we actually call it the reading wars, right? That's not a happy term. Sometimes when we talk to colleagues, they'll use a word, and that word, for some reason, or that phrase rubs us the wrong way. There's something about it that we're just not sure about. And I think that a lot of times the reason why is because we jump right up this ladder of inference. We don't ask those questions or observe and try and think about what's actually happening in their room. We go to the worst case scenario. When they say a phrase, we think, oh, I know what that looks like and it's terrible. Or I know what that looks like and it's great. So I would challenge all of us today as we think about these ideas that we really kind of slow down, ask people to clarify, to describe what it is they're talking about so that we can have a much better understanding of what we're all referring to. Because I think sometimes if we were just to slow down and really ask questions, we're all pretty close on the same page. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. So we are going to talk a little bit about the science of reading, which seems like it's a brand new term, but it really isn't. And for the purposes of today, when we think about the science of reading, we know this can be defined in a lot of ways, but this is the definition we're going to be using, and it's from whatisthescienceofreading.org. I'm going to give you just a minute to look that over. And to summarize that even more, when we talk about the science of reading, we use that synonymously with research. We mean research. And when we think about applying research, really what we want to do in terms of high quality literacy instruction is to provide responsive literacy instruction so that we're meeting the needs of every child.
So making some connections with what we looked at earlier this morning, we can see in Essential 5, and Melissa Uziak did an amazing job of connecting a lot of dots this morning, was looking at that second bullet. Supports are differentiated to the individual child's specific profile of strengths and needs. And again, that leads us right into thinking about the whole child. So we have this whole child model right here. Give you guys just maybe like 15 seconds just to take a quick refresh review of this. And then we know that applying research is good for the whole child, right? So again, going back to research, considering the whole child, making the connection to the organizational practices. So we're going to take a minute and we're going to look at number 6, which was introduced and discussed this morning. Spend a few minutes. You could just do this at your table, on your own first perhaps. We'll give you guys maybe about 3 or 4 minutes. Go ahead and look through 6 again. And what connections are you making to any of the bullets in practice 6 to the whole child? And I'll put the whole child model back up too, just as a reminder. Okay, if you don't mind wrapping up. I did get 2 volunteers, so. Right. Okay, so just looking back at practice 6 from the morning for organizational practices, and then just considering the whole child and making connections.
We talked about the whole child and how all the children need to be supported, but you can't support them if you don't know how they need to be supported. And so we talked about the word intentionally, doing intentional work, making sure that you are getting to know the child, getting to know what their needs are so that you can support them so they can feel safe and be able to engage in what you're trying to teach.
Thank you. So again, that intentionality and knowing the children, Michelle and I were talking at lunch about our own children and how different each of them is and how each of our own children their needs are met differently and at different times in different ways. So absolutely, just applying it to a larger group, right?
Well, our thunder was stolen because we also talked about the intentionality, but also about identifying all of the needs that the student may have, not just the academic needs, because often it's those other needs that get in the way first.
Thank you for sharing. Okay.
right, so as we go through this next portion, if you wouldn't mind just grabbing out the essential literacy practices that you chose to focus on, whether that's pre-K or the 4 or 5, you'll notice that I use the K3 document just for consistency, but feel free to look through the document that best applies to your work. Okay? And with that, we're going to dive into a little research. And so we're going to go all the way back in time to 1986, which is when the first time that the simple view of reading came about. So to put that into context, 1986, I personally was in a kindergarten classroom somewhere. So I like to think about this like in terms of what it was like for me to start in school, what that looked like and felt like, to the fact that this is what my teachers were learning about then. It just helps me kind of think as we go. So when we think about the simple view of reading, I think it's the worst name you could ever give to anything because there is nothing simple about this process. But that's what we call it, probably because we can fit it on a slide. So what it is that the product of decoding and listening comprehension equals reading comprehension. You'll notice that it says 1986. It's important to note that even this simple view has been revised. So what you'll see is in 2020 it was revised so that decoding became not just decoding but word recognition, and that listening comprehension became language comprehension. And I think those are two pretty substantial changes. Another piece of research that we still hear a lot about is Scarborough's rope. So when we think about Scarborough's rope, we're kind of moving through time, 2001-ish. And what you'll notice is they look at these pieces on the left, all these pieces, these separate little things that children do when they're reading that kind of weave together to create a fluent, skilled reader. Now there's some arguments about, well, are they really separate? Should they be separate strands? For the purposes of this illustration, that is the way it was kind of thought about. So as you're looking at this rope, you'll notice that it has the language comprehension piece from the simple view, as well as that word recognition piece. So it's pulling in that research, so it's building on it. It wasn't a complete departure from. And I think that's the trend as we go throughout the day. We see a building upon, not a replacement necessarily of. We're just building on our knowledge. So you can see here all of these different parts. What I would ask for you to do is to looking at those practices and having just some conversation at your table. What connections do you see between Scarborough's rope and the K3 essentials? And so for example, I'll do a low-hanging fruit one. If you're looking at the K3, Essential 7 talks about vocabulary. So automatically I'm seeing that connection. There are other pieces though as we look at this. So we're just going to take about 5 minutes and have that conversation about the connections you see between the instructional practices and this research. All right, maybe let's take a moment and share some of those discussions with the whole group. So we're going to do this a little differently, I think, in terms of share outs. So I've already enlisted the help of a pre-K person to give her perspective with that pre-kindergarten kind of lens.
So when I look at the rope and I look at the pre-K section of this, there's definitely pieces that we do, the vocabulary, the literacy knowledge, phonological awareness, decoding. Those are all parts of our day. So my kids have been to preschool, but they're just not quite ready for kindergarten. So it's kind of that in-between year. So yeah, I mean, this is very helpful because a lot of those we're building the foundation for them to become readers later on.
Do we maybe have a volunteer from the K3 realm? This is the part where people avoid eye contact. Everybody looks down, no one smiles.
The silence goes on for somebody. Feels pressured. We looked at Essentials View, the read alouds of age-appropriate books, and we found that could actually fit in both areas, definitely building the background knowledge for our students, but with,
microphone. But also with print concepts as well. So if we wanted to look at, just the concepts of print for kids too. So then we observed how explicit letter-sound relationships are within the essentials too, and that fits with word recognition as well. And then we have an essential for vocabulary, build vocabulary and content knowledge, and that fits with language comprehension. And then because we think decoding and encoding goes together, we have Essential 6, research and standards aligned writing instruction.
Thank you. And how about someone from the 4-5 world? Volunteer? All right. Well, I'll kind of summarize. I think if you were looking at those 4-5 documents, you would be seeing much of what was lifted by K3. And one thing that I really like about the 4-5 documents is that they really do build upon those K3 pieces. And that idea of building background knowledge, it really does all work together. So thank you.
So you'll notice, and you probably have already noticed this before, but when you look at the pre-K and then the K3 and the 4-5, you'll see a continuum of sorts. Like you'll see some common threads and pieces, like Michelle said, where they build on each other. And I'm glad you mentioned read alouds as well, because when I look at all of these, I'm like, yeah, we could put all of these in a read aloud. Not that we want to every time, but there are ways to do that. So we're going to take a minute and just hone in really on that top part of the rope. So language comprehension with the background knowledge, vocab, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And we are going to visit, there we go, thank you. And you may have seen this before, but we can't lose sight of science and social studies instruction, because when we look at that top part of the rope, it goes right with it, right? So what we did is when you get these slides, the entire video is linked in on the left, and we just embedded just a 1-minute clip on the right. So we're just going to watch a 1-minute clip. Or not.
This decline of attention to science and social studies is also detrimental to literacy learning. That is, that literacy actually requires, in the long term, strong understanding, knowledge of the world. It requires students to know the things that authors assume they know. And so if we don't have that in place, we don't have all that vocabulary knowledge that goes with it in that place, if we haven't developed students' ability to read and write inside science and social studies disciplines, then we're actually going to have long-term pain. So it may seem like in the short term, we're going to raise literacy and math achievement by spending so much time on literacy and math, but in the long term, we're going to pay for the system that we've developed.
Okay, so just maybe take about half a minute, talk about how much science and social studies instruction is currently happening every day in classrooms that you either are teaching in or that you're coaching in. Like either integrated, or you could also talk about specifically science and or social studies instruction. Okay. So, couple questions. How many of you think that, and you don't have to raise your hands if you don't want to, but what you have right now for science and social studies in every classroom is perfect. Like everyone's getting it every single day. They're getting that science and social studies. Like it's there. No. How about majority of the time? It's at least being integrated during literacy, like you're doing read alouds with some to build some background knowledge. Majority. How about sometimes? Sometimes that happens. Okay. All right. So what Nell is saying here, and I also, there should be a link that I'll have in the speaker notes. I believe it was in Reading Research Quarterly. They talked a good bit about the importance of having this science and social studies. And like she said, it's like a pay now or pay later. Like we're trying now to get all of this, you know, we know we need more literacy, but we also have to not lose sight of science and social studies because of that top part of the rope, right? We need that knowledge. And honestly, kids love learning science and social studies. So we're really not giving them that opportunity. And it's hard. There just doesn't seem like there's enough time in the day. So how do we get wise about that? So just speaking up for science and social studies a little bit there. Any comments, thoughts, questions around it? We just wanted to put that in just to raise level of awareness, get people thinking a little bit more about how do we get that in.
I think too, whenever we think about like the organization of a school or a school system, that top part of the rope, the older students get, the more and more that top rope is what we really focus on. When you think about disciplinary literacy, that's pretty much all they're focused on, unless there's an intervention happening.
That made me think too, what you just said about discipline. So it's important that we're teaching them, you know, as disciplines and separate, but also having them incorporated in read alouds as well. So it shouldn't be an or, it should be an and.
Great. So we're going to dive back into a little bit more research now. So this is something else, just like Scarborough's rope and the simple view of reading. When we look at this is an oldie. This is from about 1989. So I'm thinking of myself in 4th grade about this time. So the 4-part processing model. So you see here the 4 parts. I'm going to go through each one and really talk about what it means. Because I think that sometimes as teachers, people will throw out these terms, and then I feel bad if I don't know it. Like, I don't know what that is. Or, oh my gosh, I don't know if somebody asked me to list them, could I do it? And it's not so much can we list them, but do we understand them and do we see them in practice? So when we think about it, the way students learn to read, they start by seeing those letters. That's the first part, right? They see something. And then we ask them not only to see it, but to remember and to know that each one of those letters has a sound. And when you see it, to remember that sound, that they work together. And that beautiful working together is phonics. So next, we have that part where we ask students to sound it out, when we're asking them to mush it all together to put those things together. Then once they have the word sounded out, once they can say the word, what does it mean? And then more importantly, what does it mean in context? Because words mean different things based on the context in which they appear. And so all of this, there's a lot going on here for little people to do at one time. So this 4-part processing model really helps us understand all of those pieces that are happening and where students might be getting stuck and where we could help.
So again, just as a reminder, the 4-part processing model, high quality reading instruction, we must be comprehensive, holistic, and also differentiated. So was this you, Michelle, or was this me? Okay, I'm trying to remember. Oh, this was you.
When we think about all of this stuff, it does seem like lots of different pieces to remember, but I'm hoping that you're starting to see some really strong connections between these ideas. So when we think about that simple view of reading there at the top, when we're looking at these 4-part processing skills, 4-part processing system, these are the pieces that really go into word recognition. And there's absolutely some overlap here. And then when we think about that language comprehension part, we're really focused on that context and meaning. That's where we get to that. So that top part of the rope again. And again, we want to stress, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are entire college courses, entire sessions that you can attend to really dive deep into any one of these ideas. And that's important. So our goal is to just give that overview and show how it connects back to high quality literacy instruction.
So not losing sight that our end goal is always comprehension. So we want to make sure as we're working with students to comprehend that we're always prompting them for success. We've included this graphic. How many of you have seen this before? Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So it's linked in and it's also 2-sided. So a lot of times people just look at the front, but there is a lot of language on the back of it as well. So if you notice, there are lots of, ways to prompt students here or to teach them strategies as they are reading and building towards comprehension. And if you notice, yes, check the picture is on there, but that is not the top. That is not the go-to. That is just one little piece that is on here. So just wanted to add that in. So again, how do we support students as they are working to comprehend? So I was really excited, but also sad yesterday when Rusty was like, we're gonna do fireside chats. I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing fireside chats. So I did, everyone has a s'mores granola bar. See where that went with the fireside chat? We actually have done fireside chats at our ISD, and my supervisor has put together a s'mores bar where people roast them, but we could not quite do that here. We'd have to cover the fire, alarms and all that, or smoke alarms. So during the fireside chat, where we're going to ask you all to go through the process, it's similar to what he had. So you're going to find 2 other people that are dressed similar to you. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same, just similar. And then if you can number off by 3s, and you'll start with person 1, and then just share one of the following so far. So something you've heard that reinforces your thinking, something you would want to push back on, something you have a question about, anything that's on your mind. And we also wanted to add in any other connections to the essential practices, either pre-K, K3, 4, 5, or organizational that you have made so far. So then number 2 will paraphrase what 1 shared, 3 asks a clarifying question, and then you start it over. I'll pause for a second and let you guys reread that. And we will leave this up too. So this is a way to get us moving, maybe, get away from our tables for a minute, get some out of our seats, and a way to reflect on where we are so far. So we will take, what do you think? Maybe, yeah, we'll just kind of play it by ear. So start by finding somebody and numbering off, and I promise we will ask 2 people to share when we're done. So you've been warned. Thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. We'll get to go back to our fireside chats one more time later. And I found 2-ish volunteers already. You're the ish. It's okay. Okay, so kind of gave some choices, which again, we always want to model having choice as well. So a couple of share outs.
So our group talked about maybe 2 big topics. We talked about just the connection with Essential 6 and the whole child, and the importance of being intentional with that. And then the second topic we talked a lot about is how the simple view in Scarborough's rope, the connections with the active view of reading. And so we were kind of thinking about that and wondering if we we're going to dig into that today, and kind of excited about the different components of that, and then what also wasn't in those 2 models that we saw that is in that active view of reading.
A little bit of a spoiler alert right there. So thank you. Actually, that was a wonderful. Michelle and I are like, oh my gosh, that was amazing that they made that early connection. Okay, and I had another volunteer. Who was it? Oh my gosh, I forgot who my other person. Jen Pike. Oh, yeah, I saw you looking around. That's how I knew.
Well, so our group was lovely, and we had lots of different conversation, kind of everywhere, and it rooted all in just really appreciation. Appreciation for this opportunity to come together with so many colleagues from all around and to continue to have these conversations. Because out and about we have the buzz of, literacy essentials, science of reading, just all of the things, right? But an opportunity to dig in and really talk about the connections. That was our other word that we lingered around, connections in all of this and what this work means. And again, just the power in these conversations together, appreciating the connections you were making just by, for example, bringing up science of reading components and asking us to connect to the essential practices, which are also the science of reading, right? And to name that out and pull that together. And it's just great to have an opportunity to do it with others. So thanks.
Well, thank you. I mean, when Michelle and I they're like, can you talk for an hour and 45 minutes on high quality literacy instruction? We're like, oh yeah, sure, hour and 45. Like, no worries, that's completely covered. So we had a lot of conversation, and making the connections was really the place we landed. So thank you all so far. So for your comments and continued thinking. So Michelle.
So as we continue to make those dots, the bottom line here is that we need to differentiate for the needs of every child. And I feel like that's reinforced in the school and center-wide essentials, number 6. And I also think it's reinforced in the instructional practices as well. I put up number 3 from the K-3 document that talks about grouping students and how we need to be doing that flexibly, using assessments, changing that up all the time. But the reason why is because we want to meet the needs of the whole child. We want to make sure that we're addressing exactly what they need. So I think Janice actually said it this morning that our goal is really to hopefully help people to see it's not all of these separate things. It's really just making the one responsibility we have of teaching little people make more sense. And so all of these pieces feed into that. So if we're doing what's right for the child, we're doing what's right for instruction. And we need to remember that every child is different. So saying that, what I always want to know is, so show me the research. I've been in some sessions where they've said some pretty neat things, but I want to see the research. I want to know where this practice worked and with whom, and how well did it work. So I always want to go back to the research. So I'm actually one of those nerds who likes to read the research. But when we think about the literacy essentials, if someone asks you, are you science of reading? Yes, we believe in the science of reading. We believe in research that informs our instruction of reading and writing. So when we think about that, when we think about the literacy essentials, the foundation of those essentials is research. It is the science of reading. So no one really gets to own that term. Like we get to have that term too. So it's more than just putting something on a textbook, a little sticker. So when we think about the literacy essentials, you've seen this document. You have this document in front of you. What I'm going to do is flip through. And what I want to point out is that 20% of this document is devoted to the research. And it's actually, the math team would probably say it's more than 20% because look how tiny, it's so teeny tiny. And some of the documents are actually more. So when we look at this research, I would encourage you, if you access the digital copies on literacyessentials.org, you can click on things. You can access those things. If you can't find those, email us, email other people. We can get those for you. You should want to know, hey, how do we know this to be true? So this is that backbone. So, but why is research important? We pull in Dr. Nell Duke a lot. She's a literacy expert in our state. She was very important in terms of the development of the literacy essentials, along with Dr. Tanya Wright. So we pull her in quite a bit. But I wanted to show you a screenshot that I did last night of the module, the literacy essential modules. So if you've never taken those, they're free online professional learning that is self-paced, that you can get sketches for, or that you can sign up for and just choose those pieces that work for you. So I just wanted to show you just a little snippet, less than 2 minutes.
Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and research is one of the tools we can use to draw our attention to things that are important, but that again, we don't know. I'm going to give you an example from my own research. I studied 20 first grade classrooms in the greater Boston metropolitan area. And one of the things I looked at in these 20 first grade classrooms is how much time were they spending with informational text during the school day. My findings surprised a lot of people in the field. I found that on average, children were spending just 3.6 minutes a day with informational text in first grade classrooms. It's no wonder, given that children were having so much difficulty with informational text reading and writing later in schooling. So that study helped to just draw attention to a phenomenon that maybe we hadn't thought of, but that was important for understanding and moving forward in developing young children's literacy. In that same study, I had a sample that had 10 first grade classrooms that were in very wealthy school districts and 10 that were in very high poverty school districts. And I looked across those to see what differences there were. Now, some of the differences I saw were things that anybody would have expected. For example, there were many more books in the wealthier school districts than there were in the high poverty school districts. But other things were things that I don't think we would have known otherwise. For example, the teachers in the wealthier school districts pointed to print on the walls more often over the course of the day. They integrated reading and writing into science and social studies more often, and many other subtle differences that are important to education and that, again, we might not have known if the research hadn't drawn attention to them. Because sometimes we don't know what we don't know, research is really an important tool for guiding our practice.
So if you're interested in hearing more or learning more about the essentials, we do highly recommend, and we'll give another plug for these later on in the session, but this is a great way to dive deeper. So if you're looking for good professional learning and you might not have a ton of time to commit, this is a nice way. They're done really nicely. They all range in time from about, I think number 10 is the shortest at about 3 hours, up to I think the longest is 8. I believe that's right. So you can do them in a day, or you can stretch them out. There are some that I've done 3 or 4 times and just kind of go back to from time to time. There's also Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a great place to go to find research. So if you go to scholar.google.com, you can type in a topic. So if you're looking for instructional practices to use in a second grade classroom, you can find those ideas. So definitely a place to check. It also sometimes helps you get kind of more of the actual research rather than articles about research. So if that's kind of more your jam, that's a good place to go.
So Michelle and I were talking, and we just kind of thought, we should probably at least mention the current topic of ChatGPT. Does anyone have any experience with it yet? Oh, interesting. Has anyone you've used it? To plan a trip. Okay, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. So ChatGPT, and Michelle helped me out a little bit here. Artificial intelligence, right, that you can ask a question of, and it will produce a very intelligent response, right? Artificially, right? Does that make sense? Artificial intelligence. But it can be used for a variety of purposes. And Michelle and I were talking one day, and it was almost like, we used our names, and it was like, what do you know about Janice Miller? And it was like, Janice Miller is, and then it'll tell you all about you. It's actually, yeah, flattering. Yes. Also a little scary sometimes. But this is coming up more and more. And one of the advantages or pluses is that it can be a bit of a time saver, but it's not going to be perfect your first time through. So if you use it, you're going to want to kind of treat that as a first draft. So yesterday I texted Michelle, which is why I had my phone out, and I said, oh my gosh, the New York Times just published, it was in Marshall Memo, if you get those through MEMSPA, and it was a summary of how to use ChatGPT. And some of the ideas were helping explain concepts at multiple levels, editing and constructive criticism, getting creatively unstuck, so helping you generate ideas, acting as a sounding board, Spark Notes for everything, and coding even if you don't code. I've also read ideas such as if you wanted to do like a classroom newsletter or a field trip permission slip, like you can give information and it'll create a draft for you. So those were a few ideas. So yours was to plan a trip. Let's hear about that. Where was it a good trip? Okay, great. Let's hear about it.
So last minute, my husband and I decided to go on a trip to Maui. This was, the Sunday before spring break. It was going to be the following week. We were going to go on that Thursday. And so we were like, well, we haven't planned anything yet. This is maybe like not the wisest thing to do, but they're just talking about it for a while. Lots of things happen anyway. So we were like, well, here are the 3 things that we really want to do. I wonder if this can just make an itinerary for us and tell us what's close to each other, what would be the cheapest options, all of that. So we typed in a couple questions with a couple different, like multiple criteria points. Like we want to rent a car for this many days. Like here's where we're staying, we've got 2 little kids. Like we had all this criteria, and it generated maybe the best like itinerary I've ever seen. I could have ever imagined. And then we did it multiple times just to see, because it will generate something new for you each time you type in the same question. So we actually got like 3 different versions of it, so we could like pick and choose what we wanted based on the day.
Well, it is at this point, yes. And there was actually, is anyone on the UFLI Facebook page or is familiar with UFLI? On their Facebook page, someone just published, they created readers' theater scripts that were decodable that go with each of the lessons in UFly, and they used ChatGPT to come up with the first draft and then reviewed it. So I don't want to like promote it, but if you're looking at like a starting point instead of from ground zero, might not be a bad place to try. And we know there is some research that we just talked about this past August, that readers theater is a good thing. So I guess maybe we should have had that one up here, right? Like readers theater, I remember when I started teaching, that was huge. And it's kind of been going away, and definitely there's research behind that as well. So if you're on that Facebook page, you could do a little search, and there's a whole like readers theater scripts for all of them. So again, anything you get out there, you want to really look at it carefully. But if it can help you get started, it's worth a try, right?
Really hard for me not to talk about this. So I do really like ChatGPT for myself as a professional. There's some scary ramifications when we think about it from education. But Bill Gates, I just recently heard him say that he thinks there have been 2 technologies in his lifetime that changed the way society kind of worked. And the first one was the system that allowed for Windows to happen. And the second one was this technology. So it's definitely, I think that next year there won't be very many who haven't heard of it. So it's very interesting. All right, so with that, not only did you get a nice Hawaii vacation, but you also queued up our next part. In the middle of the tables, there is something about the active view of reading. And I will connect this back to ChatGPT because I was in a session where we were looking at the article, and someone brought up the point that sometimes we don't have time to read articles, or we'll be a part of a study where we don't have time to actually read the article. I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody else. Anybody ever sign up for a book study and then it comes and you haven't read the book yet? That happens to me. And so this will actually, ChatGPT will summarize the article for you. And so we had to do it in real time with a group of coaches. And then someone said, why don't you ask it to write the summary as if it were Dr. Seuss? And it created this wonderful little poem about Dr. Duke's work. And so I tweeted it out and she retweeted it. So if you're interested in seeing what ChatGPT can do for that, that's something you can check out. But that's another way you can use it. But if you can grab the article out of the middle, it has this diagram at the front. If you download this article online, it does not have the model at the front. I just put an extra copy on it. And really what we want to give you time to do is just to take a few minutes to look at this new model. So we've already talked about the fact that the reading research is evolving. It is changing. Not only the simple view, but all of reading is really changing in the way we understand it. But it's not really a complete departure from what we already know. It's more of a building upon. So I'm going to give you a chance just to look at the module, or I'm sorry, at the organizer, the graphic organizer here that Dr. Duke created, the model, and see if you can make connections to the simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope, the 4-part processing systems, any of the pieces that we've talked about today, and just have a little bit of table talk about what you see.
All right, we'll pull it back together. I can't believe we only have about 25 minutes left. So hopefully you're able to make some connections there. Is there anybody that feels a burning need to share right now? Okay. All right. So we will feel free to leave that out. And just going beyond the simple view of reading. So again, kudos to that group that kind of brought this up earlier. When we look at, making those connections, we can see word recognition, language comprehension are not the only causes of reading difficulty. And I think we've pretty much talked about that earlier when we're talking about the whole child, right? And meeting needs there. Considerable overlap between processes that make word recognition and language comprehension possible when reading. And the last one, active self-regulation plays an important role in reading. If you've ever been in a room full of kids, I find who are all reading, I think it's probably very difficult to dispute number 3. But anything that jumps out at you here that you want to push back on, anything from the model? How many of you have seen the active view of reading model before? About half? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we, again, are modeling choice here. Michelle, you're going to have to help me out if I fumble this. So we have 3 choices. You'll see there was an article behind the active view reading, which is, behind the diagram. That is the article that goes with it. There is the Science of Reading Comprehension Instruction, which is a separate article. And then we also have about a 6.5-minute clip about the essentials already reflecting the science of reading. So we are going to give choice and take about, 30 seconds, kind of flip through the articles, think about the video, and then we're going to vote which one we want to do. We can do either 1, watch the video, 2, reading the active view of reading article, or 3, the science of reading comprehension instruction. Let's take about 30 seconds, skim it through, and then we'll take a vote. Okay, get ready to vote. So 1 is the video, 2 is the article on active view of reading, and the 3rd is the science of reading comprehension instruction. All right, who would like to vote to watch the 6.5-minute video? Number 1, put your hands up, loud and proud. Well, Michelle, you guessed that was going to happen. So I was like, do we have enough time for the articles? Michelle said, I have never been in a group that chose the articles instead of the video. But again, we had choice. So, all right, so cue it up. We're going to watch just about 6.5 minutes. Ready? Okay, thank you.
The basic answer is it depends on who you ask. There's not one definition of science of reading that everyone holds. I think that if we're just talking about researchers, okay, and remember what a researcher is a person who's daily work involves asking research questions and systematically collecting and analyzing data to answer those questions. That's what a researcher is. Researchers ask questions that could be answered in many different ways. That is, they don't already know the answer. And then, they let the data and the analysis of the data help them to figure out the answer to the question. So that's basically what a researcher is. So nearly all researchers agree that the science of reading is a term, at least my perception is, that nearly all researchers agree that the science of reading is a term for a body of findings from research about reading processes and also about reading instruction. Okay. These findings include, but are absolutely not limited to, phonemic awareness, phonics, and word reading development. So that was one of the emails that we got in response to our query to all of you, was, really allude to this perception that the science of reading is just about word reading. It is not. That is not correct. There is research on many different aspects of reading development, and research or instruction aligned with a science of reading would address, absolutely address phonemic awareness, phonics, and word reading development in early schooling, but it would also address other things. One of the emphases that you tend to see in researchers' conversations about the science of reading is an emphasis on converging findings. You see that emphasis in some other conversations as well, but not necessarily consistently. So often what researchers are looking for is, well, did a whole bunch of studies align to kind of show us the same thing? We tend to get real nervous as researchers about like one study. We don't like to make a lot of claims about one study. We tend to like to have a bunch of studies, and we tend to like when those studies, we tend to emphasize when those studies have come to a similar conclusion. In the research community, there is a lot of agreement about which findings converge. I would say in the research community, we agree on more than we disagree about, but there's definitely not universal agreement, just as there isn't in public health or in, astrophysics or in any academic discipline. So there's not universal agreement. There's a lot of agreement among researchers. Often where the agreement gets to be less is the more people are in the conversation, right? So that's, you could think about that being true of lots of topics. Let's just take a topic that's in the news and very subject of a lot of discourse right now, vaccination. There's a lot of agreement if you define the set of people one way, but if you are including everybody's thoughts, then there's much less agreement. So that's, I think, true here as well. Where I would say that there's less agreement even within the research community right now, I think the research community is sorting out which research methodologies actually contribute to the science of reading. And if you heard my May presentation, you heard me explain that the website whatisthescienceofreading.org, which I'll share in a minute, you might remember that I showed you and talked about the fact that that website said that the science of reading is just experimental and quasi-experimental studies, and that a large group of researchers, I was part of the Reading Forum, doesn't think that that's true. So I actually met with the What is the Science of Reading.org coalition, made my case, and they have since revised the definition that they present. So I'll show you in a minute that they're now including a wider range of research methodologies, which is exciting to me. There are definitely differences also, I would say, from researcher to researcher, from organization to organization, and sort of which disciplines of research are more foregrounded. So some folks really foreground like neuroscience, but don't pay very much attention to randomized controlled trials that are done in classrooms or in schools or districts. Other scholars tend to put those randomized controlled trials that are done in classrooms and districts like really up front, that they really foreground those. And they spend less time talking about things like maybe basic cognitive psychological research. So that's another way where there are some differences. oh, sorry. But the bottom line that I want you to take from this is are the following, that this is an old term. It's been around a long time. It's not a new thing. Okay. And two, that there's quite a bit of agreement among researchers, not universal agreement, but quite a bit of agreement about the science of reading as being a term to reflect converging findings across lots of different research studies, including studies of different methodologies and different disciplines.
So a bit of context. This was Dr. Duke's response to the question of what is the science of reading and how should we be thinking about that as literacy folks. The articles that we mentioned earlier, you have a copy of them. Please take them. If you want extra copies, we have a ton. Feel free to grab them for your colleagues. But they are pretty good. And especially even if you just look through those abstracts or throw the title into ChatGPT and see what you find, they are useful information. So
All right, we're going to hit another fireside chat here. We have just enough time. So you're going to head back to your same group and follow the same protocol. But here, any connections you are currently making to writing? We have not talked about writing at all, but it is part of literacy, isn't it? So perhaps any connections you're making currently to writing, anything that's on your mind, any other connections to the essentials that you're making. So again, leaving it open, but leaving some prompt up here if you would like some guidance. So we'll take maybe 5-6 minutes, and then we'll start to close it down. So, okay, head to your fireside chats again. Okay, so we have one share out. Just one, party of one over here. The orange didn't make you stand out enough. Now you're the only share out. Here you go.
Right. I'm sharing out as from the perspective of being a principal in the room. And so my kind of takeaway with this is I think we need to challenge my level and the level above us to be able to really look at a week of instruction for a grade level and be able to find the areas cross-curricular that we talk a lot about taking things off people's plate. And I stopped using the word plate because it's more of a platter. But we need to look at and give teachers the confidence of seeing it modeled in a plan about where you're hitting an ELA standard in another content area. So when you're hitting an ELA instructional standard while teaching science, then you don't have to intentionally teach it again in your ELA block. I think it's the only way we're really going to be able to start getting more, because I agree with Nell on we need to be able to build that background knowledge of science and social studies, but the only way we're going to get it more in there is if we're finding ways that we can build time. I think once we can show teachers that you're teaching that standard in the science time, but you're just assessing it during your ELA assessment, I think it's the only way we're going to be able to build those content areas really in and be able to effectively get to those other subjects during the week.
And when you solve that problem next week, will you let us know? All right, excellent. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing too. Michelle and I were just saying how much we appreciated everyone just sharing at their tables and then, standing up and sharing with maybe people that you weren't necessarily sitting with. And we just really appreciate your participation. It's the afternoon of the second day. So, it's not always easy, but we do appreciate it. So learning to read is not magic, of course. And we just wanted to remind you again, all roads lead to the essential practices. And we know there's that whole suite of practices. And again, emphasizing the organizational ones, the pre-K, the K-3, the 4-5. There's 6-12. There are coaching essentials. I mean, there's an essential for every day of the week. And just asking ourselves, is my curriculum, resource, and intervention aligned with research? So always taking it back to the research. Pointing out, making another connection to organizational practices, not one that has really been talked about in the whole group, but we wanted to make the connection. Adequate, high-quality instructional resources are well-maintained and utilized in ways that align with the essential instructional practices for literacy and mathematics. So when you're choosing a curricular resource or things that you're bringing into the classroom, is it aligning with research? Does it make sense? Is it a good use of time? Because we don't have enough time, so make sure that what you're putting in there is high quality. And just a few thoughts on other places that you could learn more. Some of these we've already talked about. The Literacy Essentials, literacyessentials.org. The one clip that we showed of Nell is actually like an intro to the essentials module. It's not very long, but I know like I've used that during PD just to emphasize how important research is and why we use it. If you are doing any kind of professional learning, even if it's in your PLC, you could pull out pieces of the modules and show, you know, again, where the research is and how you could use it. And there you go. Oh, you have them all linked in right there, so they could register. Thank you, Michelle. Ease of use. The couple of articles take enough for you and your friends. You know, you can have a little article reading party, I guess, you know. But feel free. We have lots of extras on the table. Letters training is out there. This has been a grant through MDE. It is about a 2-year commitment, about 120-ish hours. If you know, is anybody here taking letters right now? Yep. Michelle and I both are actually as well. Yeah, and they're actually, no, it is shorter. And there is an administrative one that they are doing this coming summer, I believe. And I think they've opened it to K-5 teachers now. So if you're interested, I believe you have the link in the speaker notes to the Google form that has more information. Again, that's an MDE. There's 5 or 10 million that I think is currently allocated in the budget for letters training. So the IES practice guides, how many of you are familiar with the IES practice guides? Oh, yes. If you aren't, again, there is a practice guide for everything. So connected to research, and in fact, the practices, essential practices, reference the practice guides in a few places as well. So, you know, you can see just a sampling here. We have a writing one. I know there's a foundational skills one. Definitely well worth a look if you haven't checked these out yet. And they do give you like actual activities that go with the research. And again, we're hitting the tip of the iceberg, right? Like, we couldn't cover everything from high quality literacy instruction in an hour and a half, which was supposed to be an hour and 45, but that's okay. We were just even faster. So thank you so much for your time. And Michelle, you want to just close out this slide?
Sure. And so we wanted to make sure you had access to everything, and including, someone asked for a copy of the icebreaker or the connector at the beginning. I'll put that in there as well, a digital version and a print version. But the tiny URL at the bottom will take you to our slide deck. You'll see we hit a lot of things just because we didn't think we'd get to it. Feel free to use whatever might be useful to you. So we've tried to hyperlink everything. So if you're interested in that, it is there for you. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Enjoy your day.